Did you know that millions of people died, not in wars between nations, but because European empires wanted to civilize the world? Ships arrived, guns fired, and entire civilizations vanished almost overnight. Cities burned, crops were stolen, and cultures erased in the blink of an eye. Europeans weren't just exploring, they were hungry for wealth, power, and total control. Entire empires were dismantled, millions of lives were lost, and countless societies were changed forever. From massacres to stolen resources, the human cost was unimaginable. Before we go any further, I'd love your support. I'm working hard to grow this channel and share the forgotten stories that shaped our world. If you enjoy uncovering history's hidden truths, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep making these videos. The Amritsar Massacre, 1919, India. In 1858, the British Empire took full control of India. They ruled from London, but placed a viceroy in Kolkata to manage the country. Indians were given only small administrative jobs, and most decisions were made by the British. After World War I, India had sent soldiers and resources to help Britain, but still had no voice in how their own country was run. Frustration grew and protests became more common. The British banned public gatherings to keep control. On April 13, 1919, thousands gathered in Amritsar for a religious event. They didn't know they were breaking British rules. Without warning, British troops led by Brigadier General Reginald Dyer opened fire. Families huddled together as bullets tore through the crowd. In just 10 minutes, 1,650 bullets rained down. Hundreds died instantly, and over 1,000 were injured. The massacre shocked the world. It became a turning point in India's fight for independence. How could people live under such fear? Could resistance ever succeed against such brutality? The Mau Mau Uprising, 1952 to 1960, Kenya. For years, Kenya's Kikuyu people had their land taken away under British rule. By the 1950s, frustration and anger had grown too strong to ignore. In 1952, a secret resistance group called the Mau Mau began attacking British soldiers and settlers, demanding freedom and the return of their land. The British refused to listen. They banned the Mau Mau, arrested leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, and carried out mass arrests. Thousands of Kikuyu were sent to detention camps where life was brutal. People were tortured, abused, and even executed. Families were torn apart, and fear hung over entire communities. Official records say about 11,000 Mau Mau fighters were killed. But the Kenyan Human Rights Commission estimates that nearly 1 million Kenyans were executed, tortured, or injured, while only 32 white settlers died. This uprising shows both the cruelty of colonial rule and the courage of people fighting for freedom. How could anyone survive such oppression? Could you endure this level of suffering and still resist? The Irish Potato Famine, 1846 to 1852, Ireland. The Irish Potato Famine was one of the darkest and most heartbreaking chapters in Ireland's history. Around 1 million people died, and another million were forced to leave their homes, traveling far away in search of safety and food. The disaster began when a potato disease destroyed most of the crop, which was the main food for the majority of people. The British government's response was slow and inadequate. Food aid was often expensive, poorly distributed, or even exported while people in Ireland were starving. Families struggled to survive. Children foraged for grass, leaves, and anything they could eat. Parents watched helplessly as their loved ones grew weak and died. Small villages emptied as people either died or fled. How could so many lives be lost while food was being shipped abroad? The famine left a deep, lasting scar on Ireland. It is a tragic reminder of how neglect and poor decisions can turn a natural disaster into a human catastrophe. The fall of the Inca Empire, 1532 to 1572, Peru. When the Spanish arrived in South America, the Inca Empire was already weakened by a civil war. Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro came with just 180 men, but they used the empire's internal divisions to their advantage. In 1532, Pizarro ambushed the Incas, killing around 7,000 warriors and capturing Emperor Atahualpa. Even after receiving a massive ransom of gold and silver for his release, the Spanish executed him. Without their leader, the empire was left vulnerable. Over the next 40 years, the Spanish seized city after city and crushed any resistance. Diseases like smallpox spread rapidly, killing up to 90% of the population. Golden temples were reduced to dust, bustling markets emptied, and the streets grew eerily silent under foreign boots. Families mourned lost loved ones, and entire communities vanished. Can you imagine an empire so vast and thriving being destroyed in just a few decades? The Inca civilization's brilliance was lost, leaving only ruins and stories of its former glory. The conquest of the Aztecs, 1519 to 1521, Mexico. In 1519, Hernán Cortés arrived in what is now Mexico and met Emperor Moctezuma II. At first, Moctezuma welcomed him with gifts, hoping to keep peace. But Cortés had no intention of leaving. To make sure his men couldn't retreat, he burned his own ships. He also made alliances with local tribes who hated the Aztecs, gaining more power to fight the empire. Cortés and his forces began a campaign of violence. They massacred thousands of people and eventually took Moctezuma hostage. The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was under siege for months. Disease, starvation, and warfare spread quickly. Out of an estimated 30 million Aztecs, only about 3 million survived. Today, modern Mexico City stands over the ruins of Tenochtitlan. Walking its streets, it's hard to imagine the once great empire that thrived there. How would you feel knowing millions of lives and a whole civilization vanished where you now walk? Dutch East Indies, 1945 to 1949, Indonesia. For hundreds of years, the Dutch controlled parts of Southeast Asia, including what is now Indonesia. They ruled through trade and military power, taking resources and controlling the lives of the local people. After World War II, Indonesians saw a chance to finally be free. They declared independence, hoping the Dutch would leave peacefully. But the Dutch refused. They sent troops back to the islands and launched violent campaigns to regain control. Leaders like Captain Raymond Westerling used brutal tactics. Mass executions, torture, and intimidation were common. Villages were burned, and families lived in constant fear. Despite all this, the Indonesian people did not give up. Ordinary farmers, workers, and soldiers fought back with courage and determination. They faced unimaginable suffering, yet they kept resisting. After years of struggle, Indonesia finally achieved independence in 1949. Far more Indonesians lost their lives than Dutch soldiers, proving that freedom often comes at a terrible human cost. British and Australian Aboriginal Massacres, 1788 to 1890s. When the British arrived in Australia in 1788, life for the Aboriginal people changed forever. At first, contact was somewhat peaceful, but as settlers took more land, conflict and violence quickly grew. Families were pushed off their lands, sacred sites were destroyed, and survival became harder every day. Tragic events like the Appin Massacre in 1816 and the Mile Creek Massacre in 1838 killed thousands of Aboriginal people. On top of this, diseases brought by Europeans spread fast, wiping out even more of the population. By 1920, the Aboriginal population had fallen by around 90%. Many children were forcibly removed from their families, placed in European homes, and raised without their language or culture. Generations lost their heritage, and entire communities were silenced. How can a culture survive when its people are scattered, silenced, and forced to forget who they are? The resilience of the Aboriginal people reminds us that even in the darkest times, hope and strength endure. French Algeria, 1954 to 1962. After World War II, the people of Algeria began demanding freedom from French rule. They wanted to manage their own lives and land, but the French responded with brutal force. Peaceful protests were met with violence, most shockingly during the Sétif and Guelma massacres in 1945, when thousands of Algerians were killed. Tensions only grew, and in 1954, the Algerian War of Independence began. The conflict lasted 8 years and was marked by bombings, torture, mass arrests, and widespread massacres. Villages were burned, families were torn apart, and countless lives were lost. Estimates suggest that between 90,000 and 1.5 million Algerians died during the struggle for independence, showing the staggering human cost of colonial control. Despite the horrors, the Algerian people never gave up. Their courage and determination eventually led to independence in 1962. Could true peace have come without so much suffering? The story of Algeria reminds us that freedom often demands immense sacrifice, yet hope and resilience can endure even in the darkest times. The Belgian Congo, 1885 to 1908. King Leopold II of Belgium treated the Congo Free State as his personal kingdom. He was obsessed with wealth, sending armies to force the local people to collect rubber, ivory, and timber. Anyone who failed to meet the harsh quotas faced terrible punishments. Workers were whipped, mutilated, or even killed. Whole villages were destroyed, and children were not spared. They were sometimes harmed to force families into obedience. Leopold claimed he was on a civilizing mission, telling the world he was bringing progress and order. But the reality was horrifying. By the time Belgium officially took control of the Congo in 1908, an estimated 10 million people had died. Families were torn apart, communities erased, and a rich culture was left in ruins. This story shows the dark side of unchecked power. How could a mission of civilization bring only death and suffering? It reminds us how greed and cruelty can destroy entire nations. French Haiti, 1790s to 1804. Enslaved people and free people of color revolted against France in 1791. The French tried to crush them with extreme violence, including executions and drownings. Leaders like Toussaint Louverture fought for freedom, even after France abolished slavery. Haiti declared independence on January 1st, 1804. Around 400,000 lives were lost, but Haiti became the first black republic in the world, a symbol of courage and resistance. Could determination truly overcome such brutality? Boer concentration camps, 1899 to 1902, South Africa. During the Second Boer War, the British imprisoned civilians in concentration camps. Starvation, disease, and poor sanitation killed thousands. About 27,000 Boers and 14,000 to 20,000 black South Africans died. These camps showed the suffering of ordinary people during colonial wars. British India and famines, 1865 to 1943. Under British rule, India suffered terrible famines while food was exported abroad. The Orissa, 1865, Madras, 1876 to 78, and Bengal, 1943, famines killed millions. In Bengal alone, up to 3.5 million people died. Children scavenged for leaves and roots to survive. How could human lives be treated as secondary to profit? German Namibia, 1904 to 1907. Germany seized land and cattle from the Herero and Nama. When they resisted, German forces forced them into camps and ordered killings. Up to 880,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama died. This early genocide highlights the extreme brutality of colonial rule. Conclusion: European empires brought some technological and cultural changes, but at an unimaginable cost. Millions of lives were lost, entire cultures destroyed, and countless communities uprooted. From massacres to famines, from forced labor to genocides, the human suffering was immense. Even today, the scars of colonialism remain. How did these actions shape the world we live in now? Which of these tragedies affected people the most? And how can we learn from the past to create a fairer future? These stories are more than history. They are warnings. Millions suffered so others could gain. Will we remember their lives or just the empires that took them? Comment below which story shocked you the most. And don't forget to like and subscribe to uncover the truths history didn't want you to see.